Hello, I'd like to share with you a few thoughts about making connections. And as I remember my visits with one of my hospice patients, Mr. Y, there was a sense of making connections. Each one of us is connected to the other in a unique sense due to the divine spark within each one of us. We can choose to accept or reject the divine within the other. When we reject the divine within the other, we treat the other with disregard, disrespect, and even with contempt, which leads to acrimonious relationships that are not only harmful to the other but to ourselves. Only when we can accept the divine in the other can we experience true harmony within ourselves, within our environment, and within our world. Whether one is a believer, as in one believes in the divine, or one claims to be agnostic of that kind of a knowledge, or an atheist who does not believe in the divine, connections of the spirituality between two individuals and others is something that is essential to us as spiritual beings, as human beings. Connections of relationships are a work in progress, and none of us can claim perfection. From my brief time and experience with Mr. Y, I learned that he had been on such a spiritual journey. He had connected himself by finding connections with many, as he told me, and as I experienced in a couple of my early visits with Mr. Y. He had a sense of comfort and acceptance of himself and the relationships he had experienced. In order to make a connection with the other, we must be willing to risk being uncomfortable with a stranger in a strange place. The risk taken to get to know the other is actually the risk of getting to know oneself. When one becomes comfortable with one's own self, he or she can begin to become comfortable with the other, even with the differences and the disagreements that might exist. Mr. Y definitely took such risks and became connected with many others. In enriching his life with these connections, he enriched others. Namaste is the common Indian greeting that I begin with a lot of times, which means I recognize and honor the divine within you. When we begin with such a sense of divine within the other, the connection we make is unique and soul satisfying. We don't have to take anything from or give anything to the other, because when we take, we will feel obliged, and when we give, we might burden the other. Mr. Y, in his search for the divine, had asked me about caring sufferers, which obviously shows that he was not so much concerned about his own suffering as he was for those who cared for him. He, as I mentioned earlier, had a sense of self-acceptance which allowed him to become less selfish and more aware of the needs of others. The benefit of such an awareness of the other, a caring sufferer, allowed Mr. Y to connect easily, and I believe reduced his own suffering. We can carry on in the remembrance of those who have gone on before, that we have made connections with, by connecting with people that we meet. Connections are mutually beneficial to the self and to the other. In caring for the suffering of others, we can find healing for our own. Peace be with you. Namaste.